While writing the scripts for the villains featured in the new Scooby-Doo movies, I found myself needing to explain who many of the guest stars were, and not just for the benefit of any millennial or Gen Z kids who may be watching. Plenty in my generation, Generation X, may not know who some of these celebrities were. Celebrities almost as forgotten as Generation X, which should be much more concerning than all the spoilers coming up.
Today, Scooby-Doo meets Don Knotts.
While stopping for directions at a spooky mansion, the gang are mistaken for a missing man's relatives by a private investigator determined to scare a confession out of them. The late Don Knotts was best known for playing Deputy Barney Fife on The Andy Griffith Show, as well as starring in a string of family-friendly comedy films in the 1960s and 70s, frequently paired up with later Scooby guest star Tim Conway. He was even referenced in the first live-action film.
This is the most embarrassing thing you've done since you decided to clean your beans at Don Knotts' Christmas party. Huh?
Here, however, he is not voicing himself, Don Knotts the actor, but rather private detective Homer Pipsqueak, whose face and voice happen to be dead ringers for the comedy star. He is not an actor doing research for a role. Knotts does show up again a few episodes later playing himself, but no mention is made of his appearance here, meaning there exists a Don Knotts doppelganger in the Scooby-Doo-niverse.
Come on, let's find the house.
Little do they know they're walking right into Goldenrod.
Goldenrod pollen doesn't float in the air and generally doesn't make you sneeze. That would be ragweed. Another science lesson brought to you by the Scooby-Doo writers. As was the case with the Stillwell Mansion haunting, two separate plots were happening at the same time, although only one was a villain's scheme, while the other was Pipsqueak secretly investigating the gang who had once again stumbled upon a mystery.
Well, let's go in. Nobody invited us.
Has not being invited ever once in the entire history of the Scooby-Doo franchise ever stopped the gang from entering a stranger's house. Regardless, you're meddling kids, Shaggy, not vampires.
Who are you?
I'm Featherstone, the butler. Phineas Foxhole. First mate to old Captain Moody, shiver my timbers.
I'm Inga Smorgasbord. You gave me a Ingle?
Could you show us to our rooms?
Oh, yeah, you betcha. By Yump and Yiminy.
The first 30 minutes of this 43-minute-long episode is devoted to Pipsqueak adopting numerous disguises while inspecting the gang. He was under the assumption that Fred, Shaggy, Daphne, and Velma were the nephews and nieces of the missing Captain Moody, a friend of the detective and owner of the estate. Pipsqueak had received a frantic phone call from the sea captain earlier that day and felt that Moody met with foul play at the hands of one of his inheritors. As with the Addams Family, this is another episode that feels more like a showcase for the guest stars' antics rather than a Scooby-Doo story, and it takes a long time to get to the actual villains, who do end up being the nephews of the missing Captain Moody. This proved Pipsqueak correct, which was surprising considering how inept he seemed to be at his job.
Why do you suspect one of the captain's nieces or nephews?
The old captain's worth millions. Each kid inherits a fourth of the estate when he dies.
Desiring to collect an early inheritance, the nephews presumably planned on murdering their wealthy uncle, who, despite being just a retired sailor that dresses like a fish sticks mascot, was somehow worth millions. That's literally it. That's the entire design. No real estate swindle, no hidden treasure, no revenge. Just two greedy guys trying to kill a relative for money. This is less Scooby-Doo and more Murder, She Wrote. And yes, this was an actual murder plot in an early Scooby-Doo episode. The characters even say as much, albeit with a certain Saturday morning cartoon delicacy.
These two nephews showed up early and tried to do you harm.
Aye, that they did. But you showed up before the rascals could finish the job.
While do you harm could mean any number of things, there's only one type of harm someone can do to a relative when they really want that inheritance. The nephew's plan itself was smart. Arrive early for a scheduled visit, quietly abduct the victim so as not to leave signs of a struggle, possibly by asking for a tour of the grounds, and finish them off in a remote spot. An old abandoned mine makes for a good location for murder because the killers could simply push the victim down an open shaft, then pretend to have just arrived at the mansion when the rest of the family shows up. Finding their uncle missing, the nephews could then suggest searching for him, perhaps volunteering to check out the mine while others focus on the rest of the estate. After making sure their victim was deceased, they could then pretend to find the remains. It was a bit of a tightrope walk here because being the ones to find the body might look suspicious to investigators, but if the nephews wanted their inheritance enough to kill for it, they still needed the body to be found as soon as possible. If Moody was just considered missing, it could take years before he would be declared legally dead, delaying the distribution of the estate. Even if their uncle had his guard up and refused to leave the mansion, a whack on the head with a brick would be enough to incapacitate him long enough for the nephews to drag him to the mine and chuck him over an edge. A police investigation would find no obvious signs of foul play, and when Moody's remains were found, it would look like he had suffered an unfortunate accident while inside the mine, and the inevitable autopsy would likely find any head wounds on the body consistent with the fall that killed him. The nephews only had to worry about not creating a messy crime scene in the house itself. Even if things got bloody, provided they did it while he was standing on the hardwood floors, cleanup shouldn't be that difficult. Yes, luminol did exist back in the 1970s, and no matter how well the nephews cleaned up the mess, a determined forensics team would likely find evidence of the crime, but that usually only happens when they have reason to believe a victim died or went missing under suspicious circumstances. Pipsqueak could always inform the authorities that he had received a suspicious call from the late sea captain, but does this look like the kind of guy the cops would take seriously? This ended up being a surprisingly grim episode of Scooby-Doo when you take the time to consider all the ramifications. For the design, I'm giving the nephews a 4.5 out of 5. Their plan wasn't needlessly complicated, definitely worth a large payout, and provided neither one of them ratted out the other, mostly foolproof. By the way, when I describe a villain's plot to murder a wealthy relative as being worth it, I am talking about the specific circumstances for the bad guys in a fictional Saturday morning cartoon series. I wanted that on the record, just in case I have any rich family members somewhere out there who go missing. As mentioned, Homer Pipsqueak is the one who wears the disguises for most of this episode, until near the end when the two nephews borrow his ghost costumes.
They don't look alike, but I get a strange feeling the maid and Phineas are related.
Funny, I got a strange feeling the butler and Phineas are related.
For what it's worth, Pipsqueak's outfits do seem to be mildly effective at keeping the gang distracted while he searched the mansion for clues, though even they could tell something was off. Only one of the disguises was meant to be scary, the ghost of Captain Moody, which not only floated, but was, finally, both transparent and glowing. So if I was rating the detective for his outfit, he would get high marks for that alone.
The ghost of Captain Moody looks kinda solid to me.
Does he really, Velma? I can see you're still rocking those old prescription glasses Shaggy gave you back in the Franken Castle.
I'm gonna hide in the closet.
Daphne is shown running in, but not running out. Funny, you'd think Velma would be the one staying in the closet. The Moody ghost disguise is a source of confusion, though.
It's the ghost of the man in the painting downstairs.
Beware, I have come back for revenge. Oh, oh, the guilty one!
As seen several times, the ghost repeatedly switches from being transparent to opaque, directly on camera and in front of the frightened victims. At no point in the episode is this ever explained, meaning there's no discussion about trick mirrors or projectors. Pipsqueak just fades in and out. I suppose this could be construed as the audience seeing both what the Scooby Gang thought they saw as well as the reality. But if that was the case, It was very poorly demonstrated here. Additionally, if Pipsqueak is dressing as the ghost of Captain Moody, this implies he's working on the assumption that the missing man is already dead. Yet he continued pressing on, trying to get a confession from who he thought were the prime suspects. The bumbling detective was considerably braver than what you might initially believe. As for the nephews and their disguises, the actual villains in the episode who are supposed to be the topic of my video, it appears they just wore spare costumes snagged from Pipsqueak's collection, which was kind of dumb as there was only one Captain Moody, but two of them.
There can't be two ghosts of Captain Moody.
Exactly. Even Shaggy can tell something isn't right. I struggled deciding on the outfit score because the nephews simply stole theirs from Detective Pipsqueak. However, there's nothing in the rules that would disqualify them for that. Judged objectively, the costumes were enough to scare the gang and included floating and transparency effects. The fact that both nephews used the same disguise at the same time, however, does require lowering their score a bit. 3 out of 5. I'm guessing whoever designed this slide also created the bat poles, considering the villains start down the chute while disguised, but lose them entirely before reaching the end. Captain Moody's nephews got a high score for their design, and a good score, begrudgingly, for their outfit. But when it comes to their operation, that's where it all falls apart. On the plus side, any villain willing to kill for their scheme is automatically worthy of respect and earn points for their determination. On the minus side, any villain who doesn't look any further than their immediate goal loses a lot more points for their lack of preparation. Improvisation is a good talent for a villain to have because no plan is completely guaranteed and sometimes you have to wing it. But the fact that Captain Moody's nephews were reduced to stealing Homer Pipsqueak's ghost costumes at the last minute is pathetic. Further, the fact that their victim, Captain Moody, had the wherewithal to contact his detective friend for help meant that at some point the nephews must have screwed up and made him suspicious of them in the first place. Finally, why was Captain Moody still alive at this point? They weren't holding him for ransom. The only way the nephews are going to see their inheritance was by killing him, and the longer he stayed alive, the more dangerous it was going to be for them. Not only was it practically a guarantee that he would cut them from his will once he knew of their plot, if he escaped or was rescued, he would be able to immediately pin his kidnapping on them.
First, I got a desperate phone call this morning from Captain Moody. He wanted my help. Said he invited his 2 nieces and 2 nephews up here for a big dinner this weekend. Then we were cut off. I smelled foul play and rushed right up.
The only thing I can think of is that Captain Moody must have lied to his nephews to stall for time. They knew he'd been on the phone with someone because it was established that they interrupted the call. Perhaps he told them he had been speaking with the authorities, and that convinced them to keep him alive long enough to verify his story. However, once they saw a guy who looks like Don Knotts show up and start playing Barbie dress-up, they should have rolled their eyes, whacked the detective on the head with a brick, and dumped him down a mine shaft along with their uncle. Things only got worse for the nephews when the Scooby Gang unexpectedly turned up. More victims makes it that much more likely to get caught, so they only had 2 sensible options at this point. Either leave their uncle alive and go on the run, so if they do eventually get arrested, at least they wouldn't be looking at murder charges, or quickly kill their victim as they originally planned and sneak away to arrive with the other relatives at the scheduled time and pretend to know nothing. Instead, they took the third option, trying to scare the intruders away, and ended up getting caught. 1 out of 5 for the operation. This gives Captain Moody's nefarious nephews a due score of 2.8 out of 5.
We should have come to Pinecrest Mountain Lodge hours ago.
We'll get there as long as we keep heading north.
Is that the Mystery Machine or the Mystery Winnebago?
A typhoon only happens on the ocean.
Just wow. If I had to guess, the reason the van's name was cut off is because this animation cell was not meant to be filmed this far to the right. But that doesn't explain Fred's missing mouth.
No need to panic. We'll just ask directions.
Like, who do we ask?
Where the hell is the rest of the Mystery Machine?
This is probably the owner of the mansion.
Or like maybe this is.
Well, I say let's stay here tonight.
Where the hell did the faces on the fireplace go?
It's going to be dark pretty soon. Oh, it's nothing but a loose board. Come on, and watch where you're walking.
Daphne does a very impressive Velma impersonation. This is the first time the famous hallway chase gag appears in a Scooby-Doo episode.
It's what we call a habeas corpus with no corpus delicti. That's a little trade talk we master sleuths use.
Habeas corpus is the legal precept meant to prevent abuse of power by guaranteeing a prisoner the right to appear before a judge to determine if holding them was justified. Corpus delicti, on the other hand, means a crime must have been shown to be committed before an arrest is even made. So roughly translated, Don Knotts is saying that someone needs to be proven to have been detained properly despite no evidence of a crime having been committed. This was obviously just the writers tossing out funny-sounding legal terms to make Don Knotts sound like someone making up funny-sounding legal terms, but they actually kind of fit here, considering the gang was being held against their will without due process and with no hard evidence that Captain Moody was even missing in the first place.
Today, Scooby-Doo meets Phyllis Diller.
A lost poodle leads the gang to an eerie estate where they uncover a plot to steal an eccentric rich widow's jewel collection. This episode's guest star will definitely need an introduction for most watching this video because I've been around since the 1970s and I barely remember her. Phyllis Diller was a successful comedian and actress known for her flamboyant dress and over-the-top stage persona. Much of her humor was self-deprecating and focused on a fictional version of her married life. Like other celebrities who appear in this Scooby series, her career peaked right around or shortly before this episode was produced. However, she remained active in the industry with miscellaneous television guest appearances and voiceover work until shortly before her death in 2012. My generation would remember her from her numerous sitcom and game show guest appearances, while those younger would have a better chance of recognizing her voice from various animated roles such as Granny Neutron or Peter's mom on Family Guy. In this episode of Scooby-Doo, Diller voices a fictionalized version of herself as a rich widow obsessed with spiritualism.
My second husband was crazy about antiques. He adored me.
Actually, in real life, at the time this episode was produced, Diller was still married to her second husband.
Wilbur, my first, was a big game hunter. He always said I was the only trophy that ever bagged him.
Actually, in real life, her first husband was named Sherwood, who, prior to managing her comedy career until their divorce in 1965, held a series of miscellaneous jobs, none of which were big game hunter.
These are the pictures of my 5 late husbands. They were all tycoons, except Henry, my third. He looked more like a raccoon.
Actually, in real life, Diller only ever had 2 marriages and 1 long-term relationship, which ended with that partner's death in 1996. Wikipedia doesn't say if any of them look like a raccoon, though.
They all look real nice.
Yeah, nice and rich.
The implication here is Diller married men for their money, and that's how she became wealthy. But I want to stress again that this is a fictionalized version of her life. Phyllis Diller began her comedy career at the relatively late age of 35, becoming successful completely through her own merit.
What's the matter, love? Haven't you ever seen $1 million in diamonds before?
$1 million?
Wow.
Widow Diller was a regular patron of the nearby Magic Mansion, an establishment devoted to the supernatural, including holding magic shows and seances. 2 of the location's employees, receptionist Alberto and an unnamed security guard, hatch a plot to steal Diller's extensive jewelry collection. This included wearing various disguises to infiltrate her estate to search for the hidden location of her gems.
Would you know what they might be looking for, Miss Diller?
They were looking for my priceless jewel collection. Luckily, they didn't find it. I have a secret hiding place.
As far as schemes go, it's on par with the typical Scooby plot, with the villains trying to scare others away from their objective. If, as Diller claimed, the jewelry she was wearing throughout the episode was worth $1 million, it stands to reason that her remaining collection had to have been extremely valuable, making this robbery well worth it for the thieves. The villain's plan, however, was as risky as any residential burglary, due in no small part to nosy neighbors willing to call the police over suspicious activity. It also doesn't help their scheme to scare away the homeowner when that particular homeowner was excited at the prospect of being haunted, instead of being frightened by it. Even with no prior arrests, criminal intimidation and grand theft would still result in a lengthy prison stay if caught, making this a risky endeavor, but worth it for the money involved. But that's only assuming they can find a buyer for the stolen merchandise. Jewel theft isn't the same as robbing cash from a safe, and unfortunately for the criminal, the more a gem is worth, the more difficult it can be to sell. If Diller's collection was nothing more than rings, bracelets, earrings, and necklaces made of precious metals, the thieves could conceivably melt them down and get a reasonable amount from the value of the raw material if sold to establishments that didn't ask any questions. However, looking at how she's dressed, it's likely Diller's expensive collection is primarily in the form of pieces that contain cut gemstones, which means the value of the property is inextricably linked to the craftsmanship of the pieces. In other words, to keep the value of the stolen property intact, the property itself must remain intact. The thieves would need to find unscrupulous jewelers or private collectors willing to purchase obviously stolen goods. And if they do find such buyers, they're not going to get nearly what the gems would be worth if they were sold through legitimate channels. I'm giving this design a 2.5 out of 5. It's right on the border of being worth and not being worth the risk. The villains wear multiple outfits in this episode, including a gargoyle and what's described on a Scooby fan site as phantoms, but they look more like Cad Bane from Star Wars. The gargoyle was likely chosen to match the gothic graveyard setting of Diller's estate, but the phantoms just feel random, like the producers were in a rush and couldn't be bothered to come up with anything else. Both disguises also appear only once each in the episode, further illustrating that the writers didn't spend much time developing the story. While showing up in later series, this was the first time a gargoyle appeared in the Scooby-Doo-niverse, so Alberto and the security guard get at least 1 point for being first. The phantoms, on the other hand, aren't worth anything, as they've already been done several times so far, and by better villains. Both costumes did manage to scare the gang, with Fred, Daphne, and Velma sufficiently afraid of the gargoyle to run away. However, while escaping one of the phantoms, Shaggy made this interesting comment.
Come on, Scoob, make like a bag of laundry.
You want that masked guy to catch you?
They knew it was just a guy wearing a mask and not a real monster. So rather than just being afraid of a ghost, Shaggy and Scooby were merely fleeing somebody with hostile intentions. That's really no different than running from a mugger. If it was just the gargoyle, the villains would have had a decent score. But just like that one ginger kid in 7th grade social studies class who mouthed off in front of the teacher and unfairly got everyone assigned a massive pass-fail report that counted for half my grade for that semester, and for whatever reason Mr. Freimeyer decided that what I turned in wasn't good enough, so it got a 0, which brought my A average down to a D, which was the first time in my life I'd ever gotten anything less than a B on a report card. The generic Phantom designs brought down their outfit score to a 2 out of 5. This episode was nothing but a comedy of errors for Alberto and the security guard as they tried to find Phyllis Diller's secret jewelry collection. Their attempts to secretly spy on the gang when they first arrived at Diller's mansion were easily spotted by Shaggy and Scooby. The only reason the bad guys weren't immediately exposed then and there was because of that infuriating recurring selective amnesia suffered by Fred, Daphne, and Velma, who always ignore Shaggy or Scooby's warnings about moving eyes and painting or other object, despite them having a track record of 100% at being right when it comes to that sort of thing. Later, one of the villains kept missing the gang with a series of trapdoors, despite trapdoors being second only to Mystery Machine malfunctions when it comes to things that always trap the gang. bad guys are entering Wile E. Coyote territory here. When the villains tried burgling the house, they were so sloppy that it drew the entire household to investigate. Even the poodle! And they were careless enough to leave a bag with the initials of their employer behind for the gang to find. Not to mention retrieving the bag led to a chase that almost got one of the villains exposed.
Wasn't a clue, eh?
That was the thief! Let's get him!
He went that way!
Did anyone else notice this went from a sliding sash window to a single hinged casement window?
In here!
What's down there?
The animators for this series seem to have a lot of trouble remembering to give Fred his mouth.
Walk like an Egyptian.
The only thing that worked in the villain's favor was how the Scooby writers decided to fill out the supporting characters with nothing but suspects to distract the gang, like the butler or the stage magician.
We shall expect you, fair lady.
What's going on? Like, who was that dude?
A better question is, why is he still in the house? Because the Great Misto clearly did not run out the door.
Hey, Magic Mansion, MM.
So what's with MM?
A better question is, where in the hell is your body, Shaggy?
Ladies and gentlemen, the mystic marvel of the spirit world, Madame Zokar.
There was also a medium, but she was barely in the episode, which is confusing considering the title. You'd think she would have played a more prominent role, but the seance scene here was her only appearance. A further testament to the ineptitude of the villains here is they don't even get the benefit of one of Fred's traps. They're caught, essentially by accident, when the police arrive after receiving a call from a concerned neighbor who saw the gang enter Diller's mansion through a window.
Abner! The Stevens are doing something weird again!
It would have been a clean job, too, if those kids hadn't butted in.
In the end, the villain gives the usual meddling kids complaint, though he really had no one to blame but himself. In fact, he and the security guard were so incompetent, it wouldn't surprise me to learn that the reason Phyllis Diller's poodle got loose in the first place, which was the only reason the gang came to the mansion, is because one of them left the door open while searching the house for her jewels. 1.5 out of 5. The half point is only because they weren't quite as bad as Carl the Stuntman. Carl the Stuntman. This leaves Alberto and the security guard with a do score of 2 out of 5. Scooby-Doo, where are you? Oh, there you are.
So this is the Magic Mansion.
Creepy looking place.
Jinkies, Shaggy and Scooby are in the Magic Act.
Wait, what? Where in the hell did all these people come from? The Mystery Machine and Phyllis Diller's car were the only ones in front of the mansion when they pulled up. Also, how big is the mansion that it has a huge theater like that?
What are you doing here?
Just making a curtain call. Bye.
Well, we know he's in the house.
Is everyone just going to ignore that Misto is currently trespassing? Even if he's not one of the final villains, he shouldn't be allowed unfettered access to Diller's private residence.
Well, now, something I can do for you, Scooby?
Poor Scoob. He's expiring.
Oh, good gravy, Lucas. Call a vet at once.
There isn't time. Just point us at the kitchen.
You're already in the kitchen. Obviously. If you were in the parlor, there wouldn't be a ham hock behind you. And that's my ranking of the villains from the third set of episodes of the new Scooby-Doo movies, shown here along with the ones from my previous videos. Captain Moody's nephews came close, but not close enough to topple the Scarecrow. I hope to see you next time. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. If you do comment, I'd really appreciate it if you took that one extra step to subscribe if you haven't already. YouTube lets us creators know who in the comments is a subscriber, and for some reason, very few viewers who comment are subscribers. I'm starting to ease toward the 5,000 subscriber mark and would love to see it before the end of the year. It's an ego thing.